Hello, hello. Just gonna wait a while everybody kind of comes in and gets settled. I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna talk about women in the history of HVACR. There has been such a rich history of women in this field for so long, and we just don't think about it because we're such a small percentage of the industry. But in reality, we may be 2% of the industry now, but going back through time, women have made very, very large impacts on this industry in a big way. So I'm going to let people join, figure out how to share my screen here. So if you're here, just go ahead and shoot a comment so I can say hello to you while I kind of do some work here in the background. Hey, Susie. So glad you're here. I'm actually leaving for New York first thing in the morning. I'm going to do a presentation at SUNY Delhi for their entire trades program. So not just HVAC, but all of their trades. I'm going to be the only one presenting, I think, and it will be awesome, I think. I think it's the first time I've ever kind of done an event by myself, so it'll be really awesome to meet all of the people after and give them the HVA-Chicks coalition info so that the people who want to get into HVAC can know where to find us and get help. And it's a really big way to make an impact. It should be a really big event. So I'm excited. And Val got me an awesome Airbnb that is going to have a library in it. So can't go wrong with that. Thank yous. Okay, I'm going to switch this to live chat. But if you come in and you want to and post a comment, you guys in the chat as well, which is super good for networking and learning. And we do a lot of stuff virtually, but that doesn't mean that we can't use that as a way to get to know people and get a few more people in our tool belt, so to speak, who can help us learn things, or we can help learn things. So yeah, we're going to be talking about, for those of you who weren't here just a minute ago, I love books too, Susie. It's my thing. I'm obsessed with books. So for those of you who weren't here a minute ago when I explained it, we are going to take a trip down memory lane today. We're going to do something a little bit different than our typical technical training that we do on Saturdays. And we're going to take a trip down memory lane in the industry. How did it start? How did we get into this industry, and where are we now? And kind of how that has progressed throughout the decades, the centuries since heating and cooling has been necessary. So I hope you guys all learned something. There was a lot that I learned in creating this presentation. I created a presentation for the ESCO podcast and then realized it was not going to be enough time to present. So with this whole presentation, I'm like, what do we do with it? So here we are. We're going to do it on HVA-Chicks. Where else would it belong? But yeah, those of you, this is your first time here for free weekly training. It is normally technical training. It's not typical that we have something like this going on a Saturday. Usually these are special events, but for this week, we're going to go ahead and rock through it. So we have a few people here. I'm going to allow a couple more people to come in kind of as we get into the beginning of this. I agree, Susie, it does belong here. There's very few places it belongs. And actually, for a few other women's organizations in our trade that asked me to present it for them. And I was, thinking about it. And then I'm like, you know what? This is ours and it should remain ours. And don't mind my daughter incessantly opening cupboards in the background. But yeah, so we're going to go through and talk about all the women in history from the very beginning to right now, where our innovations have taken us. So let's go ahead and start. You guys can see my screen. I'm going to go into slideshow mode. So I don't know if I'll be able to see your comments in the end while I'm presenting, but if I'll try to check it periodically. Thank you for coming is the important thing. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just getting through the show. Thank you all for being here. All right, let's start this bad boy out. Female innovators, HVACR history throughout the ages. So we have little Rosie the Riveter over here, and I just thought she was super important to put in this, even though she's not an HVAC. Definitely a symbol of women in trade. She's a symbol of the suffrage. She's a symbol of where we have come from, because in reality, there should never have been any need of a Rosie the Riveter. And yet here we are. We've been trying to prove ourselves that we could do quote unquote man's jobs. We've been trying to prove ourselves for, over a century. And the fact of the matter is, it was them who were missing out because they were discounting 50% of the population. And I can't help but wonder if the technician shortage that we're facing now, where we have roughly 87% of retirees that are going to be retiring out in the next 10 years, will not be replaced. That's a huge number. That's a huge deficit in our industry. And I can't help but think if since the beginning of time we were allowed in this industry, we were just allowed to decide that we wanted to be in this industry and industries like ours, maybe we wouldn't be facing such a deficit, because 50% of the population wouldn't have been discounted in the beginning. And now we have to do the exact same thing Rosie did. We have to say, you can do this. We can do it. We can change this industry, and we can bring it back to what we fought for all those years ago during the suffrage and during the labor outbreak. So here we go. Anyway, female innovators in HVACR history through the ages. And we're going to start off with the ancient queens of HVACR. And yeah, I said, this is not a new concept. We think about, because of the women's suffrage, because of our inallowance to be in trade industries for so long, we don't think about women having been in HVAC since the very beginning. We think of it as a new concept that women would come into HVAC. And we see it even in people who mean well. People talking to us and saying, oh my gosh, it's so nice. That is kind of the societal flaw, right? That's the societal flaw that says we weren't always here. And the truth of the matter is we were. And that dates back to the very beginning of time. Obviously, we have to kind of deal with what was recorded, right? Recorded history. So since the beginning of recorded history, we have many, many examples of women being not only in HVAC, but being solely responsible for it. A couple to mention, a couple that are really important to mention that many haven't heard. It's it's against our intuition to think that from the beginning of time, women were doing this job and women were solely responsible for it, especially. And so I want to kind of highlight a few of those great examples. And one of them is the priestesses of the hearth. They were Greek and Roman. It says 700 BC to 400 AD. They were first recorded probably in 700 BC, but I think that the priestesses of the hearth actually date back far, far, far further, because they were a group of women that were constantly interchanged. So every time a priestess of the hearth would die, they would replace her with a new priestess of the hearth. And so this was something that was ongoing and very much tied to their religion and to their culture. And when we think about ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, when we think about when we talk about their gods, like we think of Hercules and we think of Hephaestus and all of these crazy, awesome people that were involved in their theology. We have to remember that everything that's recorded has some root in truth. So that was also part of their history. So the priestesses of the hearth were essentially women that were very pure. They had to be seen as 100% pure job. And the job was tending fires 24 hours a day. So you would be on and that was your sacrifice to the gods to keep their fires burning. Now, yes, this was a religious symbolism. This was a situation where the fires were burning for the gods when it came to outward appearance. Inwardly, we're in Greece. We're in Rome. The priestesses of the hearth are essentially keeping warm these massive stone temples. Imagine the heat load on something like the Roman Temple of Hercules. Like we have a very, very, very big need for warmth in the region a lot of the time. And so these women not only were tending these fires to keep them going for the gods and to provide light, right, for people to go in and to pray and to leave sacrifice for the gods, but they were also keeping those people warm. And I think that it's really important to think about these so-called religious jobs, and we say, oh my gosh, these people were crazy. They really stayed up for 48 hours. May or may not exist. Well, there were probably other reasons for that as well, right? for the priestesses of the hearth was to keep people warm while they were paying homage to their gods and their deities. So they were very important. They were the purest of the pure. They were regarded as higher than any priest in their culture. They were absolutely buried with the most, humble treasures, I will say, because they were, think of nuns today, right? They're supposed to have no possessions. They're supposed to lay their entire lives to the gods. The priestesses of the hearth were essentially the first nuns. So they were also held to those standards. But when they were buried in clean bodies and clean robes. They were given all of their material possessions, which were very few because that's how they lived, but they were given them to take with them because that was kind of an honor they had earned. So I think that they absolutely earned that honor, just keeping all of those people warm so that they could make these pilgrimages to these temples where they wanted to, lay down their lives for their gods. Example is the Roman Vestal Virgins, very, very similar to the priestesses of the hearth, a little in history. So as we get into like the, 3 to 100 AD era, that's kind of where we get into seeing more of the Roman influence as opposed to the Greek influence. But the Vestal Virgins basically did the exact same thing. The only difference is not only did they have to be seen as 100% pure, but they had to prove it. Yes, they had to prove it. They had to be virgins. Women exclusively tended the sacred fire of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. So their goddess of the hearth is Vesta, and Vesta was helped you to tend your flame, not only for warmth, but for cooking, for light. I mean, they did not have electricity back then. It wasn't even a twinkle in their eye. So we have to imagine how important fire for the people of Rome and Greece, especially. And in Rome, the Vestal Virgins were Vesta's women. So if you were to say treat a Vestal Virgin poorly, fire, you would be smited by fire. So these people were so highly regarded in their that we could go from. So it says, this wasn't just symbolic. The hearth fire was considered essential for the well-being of the state, linking women directly to heating and fuel management on a civic scale. So not only were they in charge of this massively important role, but they were also so highly regarded because they were masters at it. So maybe a man would come in and say, oh, I could tend these fires, but the second he touches it, it smokes up the whole. Like, these women were experts in their field. And it seems like something so trivial, something so, oh, anybody could do that. But that's not the case. When you're trying to keep fires lit in a climate like Rome, in a temple that is made completely of stone, and you're trying to keep people warm and keep yourself warm, and you're trying to stay awake for 48 hours to an entire week straight, it becomes a real problem. It's really, really important that you're good at your job. So then we come to the Greek priestesses of Hestia. Same deal. Similarly, women were responsible for maintaining sacred fires in temples. Their duty was religious, but it reflected women's broader role as keepers of controlled heat. So these were not just in Greece. When we get to the time of the priestesses of Hestia, and we get kind of out of the priestesses of the hearth, which is more of a generalized kind of, we're just talking about who was there because we don't really have a whole lot of proof of them. They couldn't write. Recorded history was new. We didn't get to learn a whole lot about, in general, the priestesses of the hearth. But once we get to the time of the priestesses of Hestia, we know that they were guarding Hestia's temples. We know that they were absolute masters of their art. And we know that they had to control that heat. Can imagine fires burning all the time in a place that has seasons, right? So if it's winter, yeah, pouring and keeping people warm. On the flip side, those fires still have to burn on the hottest days, and there's no air conditioning. I mean, they built their temples out of stone to try to help with heat control, but these women are solely responsible for making sure that heat was controlled. As time went by, it's documented that women in Rome, Greece, and even Mesopotamia, right? Mesopotamia is the first place that gave us all of the building blocks to our society that we currently live in now. Were the primary fire tenders in the household as well. So this is the interesting part. These very important women were in charge of the temple, right? The vernacular, the sacred fire. But also, in the same civilization, Women were also responsible for that role at home. The men needed to be out working or, hunting or where, depending on what their culture was. The women were always, regardless of the culture, the ones at home tending the fires. And imagine if your fire went out and you're responsible for feeding a whole village, or you're responsible for feeding your children and your fire went out and it's been raining and you can't get that fire going again. I mean, that would be devastating. So these women's roles were really important at home as well. They would manage heating fires for warmth and cooking. They would use cooling techniques like underground storage pits, clay jars, and shaded courtyards. And we're going to get to more of that as we go and get a little bit newer and a little bit more recorded history on that. And they kept food cool. And there are ways that they did that as well. Dehydration is something we don't think about a lot. How do you dehydrate food when you don't have a dehydration, freezer? You can't freeze dry it. Or how do you do that if your only option is kind of sit it outside where people could steal it or animals could take it? Or you have to know how to control heat in order to dehydrate that food and keep it preserved. Women's oversight was absolutely critical for regulating temperature in all areas of the ancient world. So I want you to remember what I said before, that these dates don't matter because these dates are all we have in recorded history. But that this notion of women tending to the heat control in their homes and in temples and in commercial, quote unquote, spaces, this did not just happen one day when they woke up in 700 BC. This was something that had been going on since the beginning of time and was passed down from generation to generation. Our importance as women of heating and cooling is in our DNA. It is something we are absolutely built for. It has nothing to do with strength. The only reason that people say, "Oh, women are," is because of the innovations in manufacturing, right? Is because weigh a whole bunch and didn't really think of women who were doing that necessarily as far as installing and servicing goes. I want you to remember the societal split, because there was once a time where fires were built for women. They were built to be tended by women, and women were built to tend fire. And then as we go, we just kind of created this disconnect between women and our need to control the heat, to control the temperature. Very, very insightful view in this presentation. And to continue on from kind of the sorts of things that we can prove they used in order to do these tasks, Egyptian women and evaporative cooling. So we're talking 3000 BC to 508 AD. Now, 3000 BC, again, is just the only recorded proof we have. That does not mean that women found out how to make zir pots in 3000 BC. It means that that's the earliest recorded notion that we have. Ancient Egyptians used porous clay jars, zir pots, that cooled water through evaporation. Evidence suggests women commonly managed these vessels in the households. Well, the men weren't in the households most of the time, so we must have, right? And also, we can look at the signs that they left behind. There are many pictures in Egypt and in the Mayan culture in the jungle and South America. We have these pictures of women carrying these zir pots on their heads or carrying one in each arm and a baby on her back, right? So we know that the women were mostly responsible for these things. So these zir pots, right? Very, very cool. The outside of the zir pot, and you can kind of see it in this little diagram that I found. So you would put wet cloths, right? That was, I mean, we weren't cooling or heating water at that time. It was just whatever temperature it was. So you would take that wet cloth and you would put it around put pea gravel in the interim. And then you would dump salt on the top of it. The pea gravel would absorb the water. The salt would cool the water. And then that pea make it stay cool that whole time. In the middle of the cloth that maybe your kid had a fever, right? You would put your cloths that you needed to keep cool because your kid had a fever. If it was really, really hot outside and you were trying to keep the men from getting heat exhaustion, you would keep their rags in a zir pot. It also was really great for preservation, and maybe we'll deeper into this. Okay. Frescoes depict women carrying jars and storing food in cool, shaded, ventilated areas, an early form of refrigeration, and we're talking every single civilization. There are very rarely do we see frescoes or hieroglyphs or any type of cave drawing, anything like that, of men carrying zir pots. Likewise, engineered yacht. Okay? They're ice pits, early refrigerators, and wind towers for passive cooling. This is the outside of a Yoctol. This is the inside of a Yoctol. And what would happen is the design, the engineering of these pieces, they are lined with wind, those big whirly bird things. You know what I mean? But they're lined with them. And then as the air pulls the space down deep underneath, the clay stucco that they used on the outside to build them, the sandstone or whatever they had around, that they made into kind of a mud-like clay, and then that paired with the shape of it would create a perfect situation where ice would form on the bottom. They would be able to collect that ice and bring it back to their homes, these arid places, and you would absolutely not get the opportunity to use a Yoctol unless you were of some sort of nobility. And they would keep stuff for banquets in there. They would keep fruits in there or things that needed to be kept cool, because just by design alone, in the middle of the desert, these Yoctols were designed to keep everything in the entire village cool. And there are still today thousands of them, 3000 BC. So very, very cool, awesome thing. And it kind of says how it is right here. You have a wind tower vent. The hot air comes down under the ground. It naturally cools because it comes up into the bottom of that cold basement area. And then there's water here that forms ice over the top of it. You break a giant, massive piece off. You bring it back to your banquet hall and you put all your cold food on top. Bing, bang, boom. Good to go. And we're talking thousands of years ago. So who do we think made the choices of what we were going to keep in the Yoctols, or how we were going to use these Yoctols? It was the women. Women likely directed domestic cooling practices, keeping milk, wine, grain fresh using these structures, and controlled which parts of the kingdom and which noble households were allowed to use them, because men didn't want to, I guess, busy themselves with the affairs of women, saying, I'm a mean girl and all my friends can use this Yoctol, but you guys smell like poop, so you can't use my Yoctol, So pretty interesting. Some things never change. All right. I'm going to comment to see if anybody has any questions. Awesome. If you guys are here, if you're watching, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments and I will go back and forth and check. But again, I can't see unless I'm over on that kind of page. All right. So ancient queens of HVACR continued, kind of just getting a little less ancient in order to segue into the next kind of bit. We have a couple of, well, a few, I'll say. We have a few really notable women when it came to making sure that heat and cooling was done correctly. Okay. One of the most noble would be Miss Cleopatra, right? Presided over the court that employed advanced cooling, perfumed fountains, shaded chambers, evaporative cooling. Roman historians mention her ice-cooled banquets, which required female staff to manage imported snow and ice storage. What? Imported snow and ice? So in Egypt, they imported everything. Egypt were the kings and queens of trade. I mean, they could get anything they wanted from anywhere in the world. So what Cleopatra wanted was, she wanted her ham and cheese sandwich to be nice and cold when she got it. So she was very, very particular. And there are many, many documents that we have restored over the years from just random things we found during her reign. And those documents share how much of a stickler she was that it be done correctly. There are instances of her severely punishing properly when her banquets. And she was very well known for her, massive, elaborate banquets that everybody wanted. And we talk about perfumed fountains. You guys, this was cold water with herbs or whatever they could use for perfume in them. So you would walk into the room of this banquet. It would naturally feel cool just because of the water being cooler than the temperature. The water takes the heat out of the room, right? But also it would smell like nothing you've ever smelled before. You would walk in and be like, I want to stay here forever. So that's one really, really great. And I put her love story here just because it's the best story in the world. Cleopatra versus Mark Antony versus Julius Caesar. If you haven't researched that, please go do it. You're welcome. And then we have Hildegard of Bingen. So we're talking 1098, 779. We are no longer really in the ancient world. She's just a very notable person that I wanted to include in this. Hildegard was an early German woman who wrote about medicinal heating and cooling in food, herbs, and disease treatment. She even became recognized after her death post-mortem as Saint Hildegard von Bingen. So for a woman to be sainted in the time, we're talking 1098 to 1179 was her lifespan. For a woman to be sainted post-mortem, I mean, it would only happen post-mortem for sure, but for a woman to be sainted in general was not typical. You had to be very, very, very special in order for that to happen. Hildegard, her her advancements in medicine alone are just, if you haven't researched her, please go and do that, because she's a really great research project all on her own, all in herself. But what she would do is she would go out and she would study the scientific, of the time, the scientific benefits of certain herbs when it comes to treating disease and ailments and all these things. And throughout her research, she realized that medicine stays fresh if you can cool it, right? That heating up certain herbs can create medicines, byproducts, right? Of, you have one herb, you have two herb, you mix two herb, now you have three herb, right? And so she would heat different herbs together to see if that changed their makeup and changed the outcome of them being used as a medicine. It is absolutely insane what she has done. And she also found the root cause of things like food poisoning, right? Just in realizing, well, if we salt our fish, if we salt our fish, people don't get sick. If we don't salt our fish, people do get sick. Well, maybe if we cooled it, maybe the salt dehydrating it is the same as cooling it, and maybe then it won't go bad as quickly. So very, very important woman. All right. These are some little tiddly bits that I always like to make fun of the time. The Middle Ages were a really rough time for humanity, guys. I mean, how do we go from these ancient queens just rocking it with all this innovation during the Middle Ages? Like, I can't. We did some really stupid things during the Middle Ages as human beings. So I don't know where the break was between the ancient world and the Middle Ages, but there was certainly a break where we forgot a whole lot of who the hell we are. And women are no separation from that at all. Women went from being incredibly strong creatures of the earth, right? The most in the earth, with the earth, to being these women with these, total that couldn't possibly lift a finger to do anything. And I don't know how it happened, but this is what happened. But regardless of that, we are still human. And so innovation exists, and it continues to continue no matter what we do, no matter how dumb we are. So in Moorish Spain and the Middle East, women in wealthy households managed qanats, okay? Underground water channels, wind towers, and courtyard cooling systems. I want you to remember that. Courtyard cooling systems. They also had influence in architectural patronage. So in Granada's Alhambra, that would be the 13th and 14th centuries, cooling systems used water, fountains, and airflow. Women of the court lived in, imagine that, because during the Middle Ages, we decided women should just not exist. But aristocratic women in Islamic courts played roles in sustaining these sophisticated climate control. Sophisticated. They are still operational today, first of all, the ones in the Moors. But in places like Moorish Spain, in the Middle East, what they would do is they would appear, and the wind, the air would come in, and it would force the heated air upward, right? Heat rises naturally. So these wind catchers would spin this cooler air. It would mix with the hotter air. We're left with a courtyard filled with cool air. But wait, that wasn't even enough. As innovative and spectacular as that thought process was, it wasn't even enough for them. So what they did was they built channels underneath their courtyards, and they flowed cool water by gravity, by aqueducts, all the way through their courtyards. So you would come out off the street into a lady's courtyard, and you would feel degrees and degrees cooler, because not only is this kind of cooler air settling around you and kind of treating you as surface area to cool, but also you're walking around on a surface that is actually cooler than the rest of the ones you were just walking on. It's absolutely incredible. And the fountains as well. So then they'd have these same aqueduct, the courtyard system, and those fountains were so large that they would take any leftover heat that was in the space and send it to the water, right? Heat goes to cold naturally. So if that water is colder than the air, any leftover heat in that air is going to naturally flow to that water, and that water is going to take it out. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy that they left women in a time where most men despised and loathed women. They left them in charge of something so absolutely masterful. We go a little bit further and we find women physicians and apothecaries in this period, such as Trotula of Salerno, 12th century. Lots of people call her Trotula. You can call her whichever you like. She used heat and cooling therapies in medicine, okay? The School of Salerno, where Trotula first medical school, and she emphasized balancing hot and cold treatments. These practices HVAC principles, controlling environment and temperature for health. The earliest we go back, even in modern history, we find so many situations where an innovation in HVAC was caused by the need to control heat and cool in health when it comes to health. Trotula was no different. She was a scientist, much like Hildegard, who just was really curious. She was like, there's got to be a better way to help these people. No, I know these men, they're not going to pick up the pace here. They're not going to give us any new information. So I'm going to have to do this research. For me, I'm working with lepers. I'm working with the sickest of the sick in my culture. And so I'm going to have the best research I can possibly have because I can watch it firsthand. What helps? Something to research. All right, now we're in the 17th century. Not American, of the human was just at an all-time high of what you think about our time right now. It was at an all-time high. We were really dumb. We were doing some really stupid things. We were killing people for absolutely no reason. We were letting people die of the plague and then spreading that same plague, even though like it was just awful. I mean, it was an awful time in our history. However, it was a very innovative time in our history. How is this even possible? By the 17th century, ice houses became common in estates in England, France, and later colonial America. Women of noble estates, duchesses, countesses, lady stewards oversaw the staff who harvested storage with straw and maintained supplies for cooling drinks and food. So we decided again, okay, wait, maybe we can cool our food. We knew that way back in the ancient world. We forgot it, but wait. Let's reinvent this, right? This is kind of a little bit important, maybe a little more important than this weird frilly thing I have on my neck, but let's check into it, right? And so letters and estate accounts from the 1600s show household mistresses planning ice usage for summer, a direct link between women and refrigeration practice. So these are not, and I can't stress this enough, these are not things that men would have found important. They would have found them very trivial, very female, very tiny brain things to do. However, we now know that dealing with the concentration of ice, or the tonnage at the time, the tonnage of ice that you needed in order to cool a room, that was no tiny brain principle. That was a very complex engineering marvel that these women were not even being taught to read in most cases, because that was trivial, right? But they know how to manage ice. They know how to keep that banquet hall cool. They know how to keep their food cool. They know exactly how much snow they need in that basin to keep those drinks cooled. They know how to keep their mead from souring. They know all of these things. And they are, I think, just miraculous for even caring. So then we have Lady Anne Clifford. This is who we see in the picture above. She was from England, 1590 to 1676. All right, so she was one of the earliest women documented as operating climate control systems at a managerial scale. I just want to highlight that. We're talking she managed them. We're not talking she invented them. This is clearly a very noble woman of the time. She would manage every single aspect, right down to what time these things were to be delivered. And then if they were delivered at that time, what time did we need to have the banquet, and what time did the last person need to leave, in order to make sure no person was uncomfortable any more so than in their 47 petticoats, right? And their weird ass underwear. Can I just say that? All right. So then we go a little bit further. 1706 to 1749 in France. Emily du Chaillet translated Newton and studied heat, energy, and foundational physics that eventually fed into thermodynamics, making her one of the first women to that underlies heating and cooling systems. You guys, this is the female Newton only theorizing. She was testing too. When Newton started out and he started to create these laws of physics, he was asking questions. He was curious. Well, Emily du Chaillet was also curious. And not only did they both come to the same presumptions separately, right? They came to the same presumptions that actually led into this massive innovation. As we come to our times, we would not have the systems we have. We would not have the knowledge we have if it weren't for people like Emily du Chaillet and Newton. And so we need to give those women that credit. We need to start doing that now, because they were purposefully erased. And we're going to talk about that, but they were purposefully erased from history, from science, from STEM. These women did not exist in that space. They were just erased after the fact. And we need to remember that as a society, because we constantly think about how new it is that females enter the HVAC world and how crazy and awesome that is. And we hope more of this happens. What we need to remember instead is that women have always been here. We just need to focus on not getting erased this time, right? It's 2% of the trade right now in the United States is 2% of the trade is female, or is it 2% of the trade is documented as female? So we need to be able to separate those two things. All right, moving on. Female pioneers of note, 1800s to present. This is where it gets really good because we had way better tools and we had, how shall I say this? We were more allowed to exist as female. Okay. So what happens when that happens? When they allow us just a little bit of freedom, an inch, we take a damn mile and we go and we out innovate all of those men. So women in the early 1800s were already managing coal stoves, fireplaces, parlor heating appliances. We know this. We know this. Women were handling steam back then. Women were doing some badass stuff. Why? Because they were the ones stuck home. We're talking the Industrial Revolutions, you guys. These men were out there working for pennies to feed their families. The moms were home with 16 kids, trying to keep them warm, trying to keep them fed, trying to use those pennies and stretch them for a week, and still starving, still going to bed 4 nights in a row, hungry because they had to feed their kids and there wasn't enough left over. So we need to think about the times, right? These women's jobs were so damn important. And that was without going out and working it as an actual job. But that was happening too at this point in our history. So many female household inventors experimented with stoves and heaters, different. You either used your stove for heat or you didn't have heat back then, basically. And it wasn't just innovation, it was money. It was there, you couldn't afford it. So they were very innovative. They had to say, okay, we can block off, we have a 4-room house. We can block off 3 of those rooms, keep all the kids in one room. We can use our stove, we can cook on it, and we can keep everybody warm. And that's how we'll all stay alive. That innovation alone, so much thought goes into that. So much knowledge goes into that choice. You have to know that space holds a direct link with your heating. So right there, that is primitive load calculation. How much heat do I have? How far can it go in the space that I have provided? How much smaller do I need to make that space to make that heat go further, right? That right there in itself is primitive load calculation. These women were doing it not because their husband said, hey, figure this out. No, because they were cold and because their kids were cold and because they were hungry and they needed to find out how to make food and everything else last so much longer. So they became innovative. And this is what humans do. We adapt. The very nature of being human is the adaptability of our DNA. This is what these women did. So patents from the early 1800s list misses. And this is what I mean by erasure. Women have forever been erased from history, but in the world of STEM, it has happened to a pandemic amount. They would be listed as misses. We all know about Einstein's wife, okay? And I wonder how many times that Pat put in Einstein's name, right? And it was noting Mrs. Einstein and Mrs. But that Mrs. got dropped off. Because why? Why would we add that? Einstein invented this, the theory of relativity. Did he? Only in the world of HVAC, but in the entire world of STEM, in theology, in psychology, in all of these incredibly innovative kind of segments of our society. How many times was a woman erased? How many of the things that we learn in public school was invented by this man or that man? How many times did they just drop 3 little letters off the end of that newspaper article that said, and Mrs.? We have no way of knowing. So again, we just have to make sure we don't get erased this time. We're not new here. We're just new to being allowed here. So let me just get into this a little bit more. Patents from the early 1800s list Mrs. without first names, hinting at women's involvement. But in the late 1800s, one woman made sure to mark her name on HVAC forever. Margaret A. Wilcox. Those of you who have gone to engineering school, those of you who have a deep affinity for women in STEM, you know who Margaret A. Wilcox is. I don't need to tell you. She died in 1912, born in 1838. One of the first women granted a medical patent in HVAC. This happened in 1893. This was not any medical patent. Her invention was a carriage/car heating system that diverted engine heat into the cabin. We're talking about systematic reheat here. We're talking about systematic. Not only are we talking about systematic reheat, but we're talking about it in a mobile sense. And to make sure that we were able to move across the United States, right? Even just for one small example. Moving from Plymouth Rock to Oregon took the ability of keeping food cool in a carriage, but also keeping people warm came later as we got into the gold rush, as we got into, later forms of our need to migrate. We needed to keep people warm, but now we had automobiles. We now know how to keep carriages warm, how to keep the backs cool, to keep our food from spoiling, but we don't know how to heat or cool an automobile. This woman, Margaret A. Wilcox, sat and she said, "Isn't that engine hot? Why can't we just take some of that heat and put it in here?" Systematic reheat, you guys. She invented it for automobiles. Insane. She also patented a combined cooking and hot water heating stove, making domestic heating more efficient. So at the time, we're using coal, we're using wood, and we're using the direct radiation heat off of that, right? So wherever that heat can reach. So we have to create an incredible amount of BTUs in order to get any spatial distance whatsoever from the source of the heat. So what Margaret A. Wilcox decided to combine cooking and hot water on a heating stove and use that hot water leaving the stove to radiate that same heat elsewhere. If we heat the water, we move the water throughout the home, well, then we don't need to move the heat from the stove throughout the home. We just move the water throughout the home and it will heat. That is basic hydronics, you guys, basic hydronics. She's an incredible woman. I can't tell you how much I love Margaret A. Wilcox. I don't know that I would be here in the position I'm in if it weren't for Margaret A. Wilcox. And there are a few of them we're going to get to as well. Her work represents the bridge from household heating to industrial HVAC engineering, paving the way for other incredible female engineers like, that's right, my two Margals, okay? My two Margals. Again, if you've been to engineering school, you've heard all about them. If you've done any research into innovation in HVAC in the past, you've heard about them. Mary Engel Pennington, we'll start with her. Born 1872, died 1952. Her career flourished after 1900, which is, remember that, because it's a turn of events when it comes to the difference between what women as a society are doing at the time. Doing one thing, we were a society one way, and then after 1900, society worked. So remember that. A chemist and refrigeration engineer, Pennington began her scientific training in the 1890s. Unheard of, you guys. Women were not trained in this area in the 1890s, not for any reason other than you knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, or you refused to take no for an answer. Margaret was both. By 1895, she was already experimenting with food preservation through cooling. Later in the 1900s, pioneer of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You guys, a federal job in STEM. STEM went to a woman in the late or early 1920s. She designed refrigerated rail cars and home cooling standards. Now, let me ask you this. If about how to cool rail cars, could we have traded perishable goods from one side of the United States to the other? The answer is no. We could not have moved. Innovation came from Mary Pennington. Incredible. Margaret Ingalls is the next one we get to. 1892 to 1971, born in this era, active after 1900, though her HVAC engineering breakthroughs came in the 20th century. She was educated during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Again, significant because pre-1900 to post-1900, there was such a shift in how we looked at women in engineering and in STEM. And so at this time, she was a real, true groundbreaker. She was a pioneer. She smashed those glass ceilings right along with Mary Ingalls Pennington so that we could exist within that space today. Pretty incredible. Symbolizes how women's access to formal engineering education at the century's end prepared to shape modern HVAC. If we had not started educating women, women would not have had any interest in what we do in HVAC. We would not be here today. There would be far less than 2%. And on top of that, half of the innovations that have happened in the world because of women never would have happened. Women needed an education. They needed access to that education in order to become what we've become today. And Margaret Ingalls was absolutely a pioneer when it comes to female in education in STEM. Now, this is my favorite one, my absolute idol of all idols. If you ask me to choose one of these women to be just like, I would choose Miss Alice Parker. And Alice Parker was erased in ways you cannot fathom in 2025. And we'll get into that a little bit. The invention, the 1919 patent, US 1325907A. Alice Parker filed a patent in 1919 for gas-powered central heating furnace. A furnace, you guys, natural gas. Use of natural gas rather than coal or wood, making it cleaner and more efficient. Central furnace system, providing heat throughout the entire home. Again, we have this spatial problem where we have to create an astronomical amount of BTUs, which is very, very low efficiency. If you think about the amount of wood burning without ductwork, it's astronomical. This was that made it so that we could send heat from the central source point, meaning the unit, to the rest of the home, the rest of the building. We're talking industrial, commercial, light commercial, large commercial, residential. Ductwork distribution. Again, Parker's design suggested separate ducts to direct warm air to different areas. An early concept, just move the BTUs from one part of the home to the other. She also thought of being able to separately control those separate zones. Pretty incredible for the time period. We're talking about the 1800s. 1919, she filed for the patent, which means she had been working on it for decades before that. Fuel efficiency and safety. Her design envisioned replacing bulky wood storage and dangerous coal fires with piped-in gas. She knew we have resources here. She knew wood and coal are very harsh resources. First of all, they're in limited supply, very limited supply. They have to happen kind of on the surface of Earth, and then and they have to harvest it constantly in order for enough for everyone. And once there's enough for everyone, well, now it's gone. There is no more. And also, P.S., we can't breathe. Great. No, Alice Parker wasn't having it. She said, we have another abundant resource. At the time, you have to remember, climate change was not on the radar of anyone. Maybe early theologists, early people that were studying astronomy, early people that were studying maybe pressure, atmospheric pressure, barometric pressure. It may have been on their radar that, yeah, maybe this is a problem, but really just widely and generally, it just was not even thought about. And so we didn't know how much either. We didn't know how much natural gas we had. We cracked a tap and that tap spewed natural gas forever and ever and ever, as far as our understanding at the time. Alice Parker said, we can pipe in gas. We can create a furnace around it to make it safe for people to use in their homes, for us to use in commercial applications. And then we can connect ducts to that. And we can send that heat, so now not only are we burning something that's much cleaner, less soot, and more abundant at the time, we're piping that right into the house, so that's not affecting the people who live there. And then we're going to take that same amount of BTUs that we're creating, and we're going to, instead of having this furnace get really, really hot, probably melt the metal, turn into a pool of molten metal lava in your living room, instead of doing that, we're going to send that heat elsewhere. We're going to use it for the whole house. We're going to heat because of Alice Parker's invention. Her patent did not work out. It fell through. But the concept was the absolute other innovator after her, including talk about Rheem creating the first water heater, first gas water heater. Anybody who used gas in an HVAC appliance after that came after Alice Parker had already figured out how to do it. Now we have to get into something other than her innovation. And Alice Parker has lots of other inventions too. You guys go check it out. The erasure of Alice Parker is the most important part of her story. And it's the part that we have to tell, because now we know Alice Parker signed that patent. That's great. Wonderful, in fact. It's not just great, it's wonderful. But who is Alice Parker? Because up until about 3 years ago, you would see this picture down here of Alice Parker with her invention. You would see them anytime there was a newspaper article, anytime there was a mention of Alice Parker, it would be accompanied by this photo. Unfortunately, that photo is not Alice Parker. It was never Alice Parker. This woman was a white woman who lived on the same street as Alice Parker. And when the original reporting came of Alice's wonderful invention that has the chance to change the world forever, when that happened, they went and took a picture of Alice's neighbor, and they told everyone that Alice Parker was white. Not an American woman. In their eyes at the time, in the early 1900s, in their eyes at the time, this was unacceptable. How dare she? First of all, we have to think of segregation still went on for 40 plus years after Alice Parker's invention patent was cleared. So we're talking about one side of the street, Alice Parker, the real Alice, and the other side of the street, not ever crossing paths for any reason, because it wasn't allowed, was the girl they said was Alice Parker. So Alice Parker would have probably known that they did this. She could read. She was well educated. I'm sure she got the news and came out in it. How do you think she felt when she found out that they did not come? The news never even came and spoke to Alice Parker about her invention. They went to this woman's house, asked her to take a picture, told her why. She said yes. She agreed to it. And then she became Alice Parker for the next century. I can't imagine what that kind of erasure would feel like, not only because your accomplishment is so grand, so grandiose that they think it's worth noting so often over and over again, but that you as a human being are considered unacceptable to them, to be somebody well enough educated to have come up with this, but also somebody who should get recognition for this. So when we think about that kind of racial and gender specific erasure, oftentimes we think they didn't like her because she was Black, and so that's why they gave the credit to somebody who is white. Yes, most of the time that's the case, but there's so much deeper than that, because in this specific situation, the talk of the time about African Americans was that they were uneducated. Why? Because society kept them uneducated. They were completely segregated from all of the good schools. They were not allowed to, nobody was around to teach them to read, to write. Their parents, not their grandparents, but their parents had been slaves. A lot of the times their grandparents were still alive and remember being slaves. Like it's insane the amount of erasure that we did. So we could not, as a society, have this incredible patent by this incredibly well-educated, smart, intelligent, amazing woman be seen with a dark skin color. Because what would that mean for the narrative that the white people were telling other white people about Black people? If they see Alice Parker in all of her African-American beauty and they see this incredible patent, well, they're going to know that she was well educated. They're going to know that she wasn't some dumb dummy that we kept on the side of the road and locked down and chained so that they couldn't ever learn. They're going to know that she is just a human, just like them, just as capable, more capable of this patent than the woman they said was her for a century. And so when you see a picture of Alice Parker, if you see it online, if you see it on a newspaper, if you see it in a museum, hopefully they have the correct picture of Alice Parker. I would hope they would have done that research and known that about her. But if you see this picture down here, make sure that you bring it to light. Say something. That is not Alice Parker. This is Alice Parker. And now her family has gone to bat so many times over and over again. She's received postmortem awards. I mean, it's been noted that we did something really, really bad as a society to Alice Parker's memory. But now we are bringing it back. And it's very, very rare, because how many women out there, how many women in history never got that opportunity? How many times did the misses get dropped off the end of the patent and their husband is gone down in history when we don't even know their names? How many people didn't have a family like Alice Parker to fight for her memory? Probably thousands upon thousands. And so now when I talk about us not ever being new to this space, we're not new to this space, you guys. We're not new to this space. We were erased. We were erased. And we need to just make sure that no female is ever erased from this space again, because the female brain absolutely works differently from the male brain. And anybody who wants to say otherwise is absolutely wrong. Of course, there are differences between our physical compounds. Of course, there are differences between the way that our minds work, the neural firings within us. Just as there are from person to person, there also is from gender to gender. But when we discount half of that, when we discount the other side of that, we're missing out on all of the innovation that comes with it. So anytime you see white girl Alice Parker over here, make sure that you inform whoever posted it, whoever wrote it, whoever showed it to you, that that is not Alice Parker. That was Alice Parker's white neighbor, and that's the only reason that her face is next to that patent. We love you, Alice. This is another one of my absolute favorites. I did a HVAC history time on this one. This is a really great one to talk about too. It's Maria Telkes, 1900 to 1995, known as the Sun Queen. Why was she known as the Sun Queen? Well, because this Hungarian-American physicist and biophysicist specialized in solar energy for heating and cooling. This is a time where we had a boom after the suffrage of women in education. Women were going to college. They were pushing aside and they were walking their cute little derrieres right in there. And they were saying, give me the same education because I can handle it. I'm not weak and I'm not stupid. So born of that philosophy was Maria Telkes. She co-designed, this is what she's best known for. She has whole lots of other inventions that are very, very important in the HVAC world. But she co-designed the Dover Sun House in 1948. So think about 1948, post-World War II, right? Very, very soon post-World War II, only a few years. And she's Hungarian-American. So she's Hungarian-American. She experienced the Holocaust, okay? One of the first solar heated homes using Glauber salt for thermal energy storage. So it's always been known the sun is energy. It's always been known that the sun gives us energy. What's not always been known is how to harness energy. And there's a civilization scale, okay? And it says that a type 1 civilization can harness all of the energy from its energy source, meaning our sun, okay? A type 2 civilization can harness all of the energy from their source and also from the surrounding area of the planet and the source. So our solar system, if you will. Okay. And then a type 3 civilization is a civilization that can harness all of the energy available to them in all galaxies. Okay. It says the galaxy, but back then we didn't know that there were multiple galaxies. So that would now include all galaxies. Okay. We are not even a type 1 civilization. We cannot harness all of the energy from our source, from our sun. We can barely harness a little bit of it, okay? So it's always been known that was a possibility. We just don't know how to do it. And still today in 2025, we don't know how to do it well. We're not doing it well. We are figuring it out as we go. We're still innovating. We're still learning, but we need to remember that we are still a baby civilization. We're not even a type 1. So for this woman, Maria Telkes, to co-design the Dover Sun House that is completely heated by solar energy in 1948, right after the war, that she was literally targeted in. Okay. So they took the Glauber salt. So they figured out how to accept the sun, right? How to accept the joules from the sun. How do we accept the energy? They figured out how to accept it. They built the panels. They made those panels even into windows, 10-foot tall, double glazed, south facing windows. Absorptive black panels are heated by radiant solar energy. So they lined those windows with these absorbent black panels to take the energy. Well, now what do we do with it? Now we have more energy than we can store. How the hell are we going to store all this energy? We figured out harnessing it. Now we need to figure out how to keep it. So they use Glauber salt. Glauber salt canisters store and release heat. They release it naturally. Why? Because cold goes to heat naturally. So Glauber salt stores that energy and it releases it as needed. Insane. What an insane innovation for the time, and then for a woman, and then for an immigrant woman. And just, it's crazy. It's crazy what we've been doing here for all this time. For them to act like we're new. We're new here. We're the new girls in school. She also invented a solar powered oven and contributed to solar distillation of water. So like without Marie Telkes, we probably wouldn't have gotten over that hump of how to distill water using solar energy. Her legacy, Telkes is a direct link between HVAC and renewable energy integration. What are we looking at right now in 2025, ladies and gents? We're looking at an absolute uprising of the energy world, the HVAC world smashing together. We talk about things like electrify everything, electrification, heat pump technology, right? We are at the peak of smashing those two things together. And if it weren't for Maria Telkes, we may not be. One woman. We think, even when we say things like one woman might not be able to make that much of a difference in the world, but a whole shit ton of women can, that's not even true. Maria Telkes was one woman. Alice Parker was one woman, right? This is insane. It's insane what we can do. We are so capable. So now let me just check the comments in case we need to add something. All right, sweet. So now to the female innovators of today, of the present day. First off, I could have chosen 1,000 women of today to add, and we would have been here forever. So instead, I only chose a few, but there are a few really, really important ones, okay? So starting off with Nora Majero from Kenya. Her innovation was that she invented the VaxiBox, a portable solar-powered refrigerator for vaccines and temperature-sensitive medical supplies. So wait, we go back to Hildegard, right? Saint Hildegard of Benin. She's the first person that realized we needed to keep, or the first woman that's documented anyway, that said we need to keep all of these herbs cold if we want them to work for medicine. Now, all of these centuries later, we have Nora Majero in Kenya saying we need to keep these cold. I can't get all these vaccines out to all these people in a hot, humid climate like Kenya without a way to keep them cold. And so that same innovation from all of those centuries ago directly translates into Nora's innovation for now. And then in 500 years, it'll directly translate to someone else's. And that's insane, you guys. That's the connection that we have as being these women in these trades. I am Hildegard. You are Hildegard. Nora is Hildegard. We are all doing the beginning, and we are all at the peak, and we are all at the end of the innovation in this trade. So now Nora's VaxiBox is used by the Red Cross. It's used by FEMA. It's used by almost every single humanitarian aid effort in the world uses the VaxiBox because they need to keep these medications and these vaccines cool while they get out to the people who need them. Otherwise, they're junk. Without the refrigeration part, they're screwed. So It maintains cold storage for up to 10 hours and is designed for deployment via motorcycles, boats, or bicycles, specifically for remote regions. So this is not this big bulky refrigerator you can see in the picture here. This is not this big bulky thing that's meant to get around in a car or a van or a truck. This is meant to go on the back of a bicycle because, boy, we are getting those vaccines in there. I don't care what it takes. We're getting those vaccines in there. And Nora thought of that. And Nora's invention has saved thousands upon hundreds of thousands of lives. Pretty great. Thank you, Nora, for all of your special, special contributions to our lives. Then we have somebody a little bit closer to us. We have Amy O'Grady, USA, role, executive director. A direct link between HVA-Chicks Coalition and Women in HVACR for them, and we have things that work really, really well for us. It would be nice to somehow talks about that, you guys. Like we are talking about how we can work together on certain things, but as of right now, my main job is to kind of get the coalition to where it was always going. We're not even there yet. So that's where we're at right now. But Amy O'Grady is a phenomenal female, you guys, a phenomenal woman, as Maya Angelou would say. She is the executive director of Women in HVACR. She leads national initiatives in mentorship, education, and workforce development to increase female representation in HVAC trades. She's absolutely amazing, you guys. If you don't know Amy O'Grady, I don't know her personally either because at the events, there are people that go in her stead. But she's a really phenomenal woman to research because she worked really hard to get there. Definitely one of us. Go check her out. Even more my favorite here, we have Holly Paper, USA, another woman that I don't know personally. I am just absolutely floored with. Her role as of 2024 was she was appointed as the first woman president of Trane's commercial HVAC division. Trane's commercial HVAC division president is Holly Paper. a woman. And it didn't happen until 2024. So now look at all those ancient women we just looked at. Look at all those women in history that have been here the whole time. And somehow, some way, Trane's commercial HVAC division never had a female leading it until 2024. And then Holly made that happen. Imagine how special. Imagine how impressive her qualifications have got to be to land that role after all of those decades of no women being in that role. She is an absolute force, a badass. Her impact is that she pioneers female leadership in one of the largest HVAC corporations, and she also serves on the boards, on a bunch of boards. One of them is AHRI. So she's not only working for a single manufacturer, she's not only owning her space in this space as a female, but she's also sitting on all of these boards to make sure not only that people are held accountable and that honesty is among those integral board sanctioned activities, but also that there's a female footprint in one of them. So thank you, Holly. Thank you, Amy, for your awesome contributions of human history. We will continue to learn, to work hard, and to build this industry through innovation and progressive movement. Celebrate women in industrial trades today and always, as if the future of our infrastructure on it, because it does. It does. As history repeats itself over and over again, we can clearly see that it does. So you guys, I'm going to go ahead and come back over here to the video again. Thank you for being here. And it doesn't matter if you're female or male. This wasn't for any one demographic. It was, if anything, an educational piece to show everyone that we're not, because there are still a whole lot of men and even women, and I can't tell you the pushback I get from women in this industry, but maybe if we can show them that we've always been here and that we're not the new girls in town, maybe a little bit more respect will be kind of present at the beginning of our connections and our relationships with our coworkers. And maybe if bosses understood that this is not a new concept, that the need to tend the fire is absolutely embedded in our DNA as females, because it was our job all throughout history. It was our job to make sure that our husbands and our children survived by keeping them cool or warm. It was our job to keep the food from spoiling when we had worked really, really hard to get it back then. It was our job. Single woman in the world on earth. So maybe if we can get that kind of deeper, a little bit more known, maybe, just maybe, this space will get a little bit more comfy cozy for us women. remember that you're not new here. Even if it's your first day in HVAC, you're not new here. This is part of you. And you can, not only can you do it, but you should do it. And you can be absolutely great at it. So those of you, if you need a push ever, come back and watch this video again. If you're watching this after it was put live, please go ahead and post all of your comments and questions in the comment section. I will try to keep up with them. A really important thing to talk about. And if anybody wants to come on the HVA-Chicks radio show and talk about their experience as a woman, want to come and talk about, we would love to even have even a male who thinks maybe they understand why men are sometimes weary about accepting us in our roles, even though we've been here since the beginning of time. We would love to hear about that. We're open to conversation. We just need everybody to know that we're not new here and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So thank you guys for being with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode of our free weekly Saturday training. Next week, we will be back on a technical topic. So be ready for that when I come cracking the whip, all of my lovely, beautiful students. And again, I will be at SUNY Delhi Monday night talking to all of their trades programs to know where to go after school. And we are going to go put ourselves out there and say, you can come and be with us. Other ones if you're not in HVAC and you wanted to join a community. So anybody that's in the area, please reach out to me. Val and I would love to meet up and say hello to you. If you'd like to come to the talk, please reach out. I'll tell you how to do that. In the meantime, I will see you guys next Saturday night. Have a great day.